Hello everyone, welcome to Tactica, Imperialis and to today's video. Today is going to be a my thoughts on video, and I wanted to talk today about a painting and modelling topic, that being choosing a colour scheme for a hobby project, an army or a model. I'm sure most of us have been in the situation where we've gone and bought a lovely new model, or we've started a new army and then we've sat down with it, we've built the models and we've thought, right, how am I going to paint this then? And been at a complete wit's end. Or we've looked at a paint scheme in a codex or a battle tome, and we've thought, actually, nah, none of that. What would I do instead? And tried to come up with our own personalised colour scheme in terms of creating the army. We've all done it, I'm sure, in one way or another, whether we've decided to replicate something from a book, or we have decided to make something ourselves. Choosing a colour scheme is arguably one of the most important aspects for a non-ultra competitive army. Like, I understand that there is a reason, if you're a competitive player, to paint a certain way. You get points for it at tournaments for having your army battle ready and having it based and all of that, absolutely. So it is a choice you have to make. But particularly for narrative players or people who are building the army to be theirs long term, rather than, say, the one they're going to have for the next month until it gets nerfed, it can help to create that sense of attachment. I talked a few months ago about conversions and how conversions can make an army feel yours, like it's your army, your models being done the way you want them, and adding that personalised touch, that extra bit of flair that makes the army belong to you and identifiably yours. And a colour scheme is the same thing, whether that's borrowing one and putting your own spin on it, taking one verbatim out of another book or another person's guides, or whether it's making something entirely unique for yourselves. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is because I'm basically going through that process at the moment. I'm at the moment, well, to be honest, I've got about 5 different Elven hobby projects on, and I've got a few models for a new project, and I am really umming and ahhing and trying to work out how I want to do that colour scheme. So I thought what I'd do is I'd sit down and talk about it, rationalise a few ideas, go through some things, and sort of explain the thought process of how I'm going to choose this colour scheme, whether it makes it into a project series or not. The answer is probably not. But how does one choose a colour scheme? Well, there's a few different things you can do. The first and the most important step for me is the source material. Whether that's novels, codices, battle tomes, rulebooks, White Dwarf, whatever, source material for ideas is the best place to start. For example, let's say you're wanting to play Space Marines, but you have no idea what flavour of Space Marines. The new codex is chapter tactics. You're not really fussed about replicating one of the maybe the main chapters because you don't want to paint yellow, or you don't want to paint green, or you don't like Gilliman, whatever your particular logic happens to be. So you can do a lot of reading. You might decide that you like the look of the Token Keepers, which is White Dwarf's own chapter, and take their colour scheme and think, they sound really cool, I'm going to try and recreate that. Or you might hear about, say, the Excoriators in the Legion of the Damned novel, think Zachariah Kirsch et al. Are super cool, I want to make an army of those, and you go and do the research. Or on the other hand, let's say you're in Age of Sigmar and you're playing Slaves to Darkness. Do you want to go with the classic black armour of Chaos Undivided? Do you want to go down the Cornate route? Do you want to go down whatever route? And if you do decide to go down a God or Chaos Undivided, how are you going to show that? And you can look at all the source material that Games Workshop has made, because there is oodles and oodles and oodles and oodles of it to give you inspiration and ideas to set you on the right path. And most usefully, at the moment, Games Workshop has decided to sort of split their painting guides into 2 phases, or even 3, because you can now paint using contrast, or the regular paints, but you've also got the option of battle ready versus parade ready, which is how they describe sort of their 2 stages of painting. If an army is battle ready, normally that's base coat wash done. Maybe base coat wash highlight tops. for battle ready. Parade ready is where you start adding all the extra phases. And what that does is it means that for newer painters, or maybe ones who are still wanting to learn the fine control required to do the extreme edge highlights, or the several layers required for armies on parade, they have a paint scheme that they can aspire to that isn't just halfway to a Games Workshop paint scheme. It's a Games Workshop approved paint scheme that is set and tabletop acceptable, which for some players can be a real mental hurdle to overcome of, this army doesn't look good enough, I don't want to put it on the table. Well, if it's Games Workshop approved to be painted to that level, that can be a nice little motivating factor. And it also means you don't have to buy as many paints to do battle ready, because you don't have to buy the 16 million highlight paints, because you just don't need them. So source material is the best place, and luckily nowadays there are painting guides hidden away in every single publication. For example, I've recently bought the Daughters of Cain battle tome, the second iteration of that, and it contains paint schemes for all of the major temples, plus 4 different skin variants, Marathi herself, 3 different snake variants, 3 different wing variants, a bunch of metal variants, and all sorts of different options. The Ideneth battle tome that I bought way back in 18, was even better. It contained 6 full painting guides for painting each of the enclaves in full detail, 5 steps each, as well as details for eels, leviathans, alapexes, deep mares, extra armor, metals, all of it. It gave full comprehensive detail, so if you are wanting to replicate a scheme, the only difference is in your control of the brush, and that is a skill you can train. Rather than being an artistic choice, it is a skill you can train. So start with the Games Workshop publications, whether that's visual or literary, and see if something grabs you and if you want to replicate it. To give you an example, my Sons of Malice, my Stormcast hobby project, were done exactly like this. I looked through the battle tome, I saw one I liked the look of, and I decided to replicate it. The other alternative, and one that I've been doing quite a lot, and I'll show you this on my second camera in a moment, is tactical colour schemes. And that is using your army to train you in painting a particular colour or a particular style. Let me show you what I mean. So if I cut to my second camera, what you can see on screen is the last 3 or 4 hobby projects that I've worked on. Most of these have been on the channel as well. You've got A Town Called Malice, my Stormcast project, and the 2 seasons of An Elfin Adventure, Daughters of Cain, Cities of Sigmar, and Ideneth Deepkin, and I've thrown in a few Lumineth Realm Lords as well, as they're my more recent work. And as time has gone on, from project to project to project, I have picked different colour schemes to practice different skills. So, Stormcast, for example. When I started my Stormcast project, and here is my Knight Questor Gabrielle Shoreheart, just as one of the example models, I decided to use this project as 2 things. A way of training myself to paint black, because I never really had got a good technique for painting black. I just put a black undercoat on and called it a day. So I'd never trained myself in painting black. It was a method in training myself in painting gold, because I had got Magnus the Red waiting for me back in England, because I did this project in France, and I wanted to get Magnus's gold armor absolutely right, so I trained myself a bit in painting gold. It was my first foray into purple, and it was also my first foray into texture paints, using them to create basing effects. This one I think is Martian Iron Earth, as I recall, with a Carroburg Crimson wash. Because at the time, I was coming off the back of my Orcs and my Tau, where I'd learned to paint green, I'd learned to paint red, and I'd started to learn to paint blue. But I'd never got my head around painting black. I'd never used purple. I'd not really got my head around gold, especially as a metallic, because I didn't need it much on my Orcs. Silver I was okay at, but gold I hadn't really trained in. And given I didn't just want to paint the bases bland, I wanted to try texture paints. And that was what A Town Called Malice was to me. But you'll notice this model is converted. It's got a head swap. Why has it got a head swap? because Gavriel Shawheart had a bare head, and I could not, at the time, paint flesh for love nor money. Couldn't do it. I was absolutely terrible at it. Elfen Adventure Season 1, my original Witch Elves look awful and will eventually be repainted. Step forward and Elfen Adventure Season 2, which was my Daughters of Cain. So at the time, one of the models in that project was Morathi. Here's Morathi herself. And you can see some of the techniques being carried forward. I've now got a good grasp of how to paint gold, and the gold of Morathi's wings, even though it's now 2-3 years old, still holds up really well. I had a decent grasp of painting reds. I had a decent grasp of layering up blacks, so I've got bits of greys worked in there. But I've now practiced, and you can see this just as well on Morgwaith, which is one of my more recent models in my Daughters of Cain army. I have practiced quite extensively in painting flesh. I used the Daughters of Cain version 1 battle tone to give myself a colour scheme, bought myself a pallid witch flesh, and went to work. And it took me several goes. I think there was probably a good number of witch elves that look tolerable, and a few of my early Melisai are tolerable. They're not great, they're just acceptable. But I found a way to paint flesh, and that was what an Elfen Adventure Season 2 was for me. I then would go and replicate that in my Idoneth, so I've got a Soul Scryer that I did after an Elfen Adventure Season 2, where I kept the same sort of flesh tones throughout, and more recently with my Lumineth, I've got one of Myri's Purifiers, and my Cities of Sigmar. This is my Dreadlord from the Black Dragon that I got at the time of Broken Realms Morathi. And then I moved over to my Idoneth Deepkin toward the end of an Elfen Adventure Season 2. Now, from my Tau, I already had a grasp of how to paint blue. And certainly I had this idea of painting blue with deep colours and a sharp edge highlight. And that is exactly what I went for with the armour. I took the Morphan paint scheme from the Idoneth Battletome, and I changed it slightly so that I would have the bright blue edge highlights onto the blue armour, which are a bit more sharp than, say, Morphan, but allowed me to take that skill and bring it forward. What I added to my repertoire was the ability to paint a very dark palette without an over-reliance on red, and also to try and create a more blue-green, kind of sea green kind of colour scheme. I discovered the wonder that is Stegodon Scale Green in a town called Malice, and I put it to good work alongside my Tau flesh colours of the Fang and Rust Grey. And I built on what I'd learned from painting my Tau to develop it on my Idoneth and then bring it back to my Tau several years later. Again, I've got the gold now pretty refined. I've got the reds pretty refined. I've got a technique for the blue that I can develop during this project. And I'm now adding in greens, a little bit of purples, and I'm getting to keep practicing the flesh colours that I developed earlier in the project with the Daughters of Cain. And all of that would then feed into my Lumineth Realm Lords, where, again, I've got scenic basing going on. You can see, for example, the Soul Scryer, I use texture paints again. I've got these properly modelled scenic bases on Morathi, Morgwaith, and the member of Myri's Purifiers. I've forgotten the name off the top of my head. And again, it was just a chance to practice those techniques. But with my Lumineth, I had a new problem. I didn't want to paint white. I still can't paint white. It is one colour that I am utterly petrified of painting, and maybe I never will. It's maybe second behind only yellow in terms of things I can't paint. And no, Daughters of Cain hair doesn't count. So I had to develop a new Lumineth paint scheme. Developing off of my Idoneth scheme, I decided to use dark blue armour with the sharp edge highlights, and I decided to go for a pale grey, mixing in that blue tone from my Idoneth with rust grey in order to keep a cohesive colour scheme across the armies, and throw in white edge highlights so that I had at least a little bit of practice painting a little bit of white. I used it as a chance to refine my flesh technique, develop and refine my gold and silver, and also flesh out with my hero models the sea green colour scheme that I'd started with the Idoneth. And by adding in more reds, adding in more blues, adding in more greens, including Baharov blue, Wild Rider red, and others, that has culminated in what I think may be my favourite model of all time. Sorry Marathi, sorry Teclis, that would be the Light of Eltharion, which I finished a couple of weeks ago at the time of recording, and I am stupidly proud of it. Sorry, I still am surprised they painted this with a medium layer brush. But you've got those sort of, everything I've been talking about comes together. You've got the sea greens that I've been developing with more layers and highlights. I've got about 6 different layers of red that I've been building up. I've still kept the gold technique. I've fleshed out the silver with a little bit of flaming tones. The blue armor is the best it's ever been. The grey rose with the white sharp highlights, and the scenic basing technique that I took from my Stormcast is continuing through. And it's all about developing one technique after another through the means of the hobby project. Each project has given me a different skill, whether that's painting with textures, whether that's painting with dry paints, which I learned from my Stormcast and my Melisai, whether it's flesh paints, whether it's blues, reds, greens, greys, gold, silver. I've developed section by section different skills for painting different colours, all of which leads to Shawn Michaels in the corner, that being Sigvald of Slaanesh. Yeah, I did the thing. I got the Slaanesh army. I talked about this on podcasts. I did the thing. I got the Slaanesh army, and that's the project I'm trying to work out. So, that sort of shows you the idea of tactical colour schemes. Picking a colour scheme for your army that allows you to develop a new skill. Maybe you want to learn how to paint red, so you pick an army that will require you painting red, say Blood Angels, or Evil Sun's Orcs, or I don't know, pick another one, something from the Mortal Realms. Maybe you pick Soulblight and Soulblight Gravelords and you go for the classic Blood Knight colour scheme. Whatever, you pick a colour scheme that allows you and forces you to practice painting red. You go look at the tutorial guides, whether that's from Duncan Rhodes, Games Workshop, whoever, whatever your skill level is at, and you develop your skill set in that particular colour. And it allows you to build up a repertoire 1 or 2 colours at a time, so that when you want to do something completely out of the blue, you have a base skill set. So with Sigvald, for example, I am very good at painting gold. I know that no matter what I do, I can paint a decent gold. So his armour will look alright. It won't look as good as heavy metal, but it will look alright. But I have not painted human flesh in about ever. So I need to find a new technique for painting human flesh in my Slaanesh project. I also have very little experience with pinks and purples, and so I want to develop those, and so I looked up a burgundy paint scheme that Games Workshop did, and that's going to be my main fabric colour scheme going into this project. And it's all about adding in a different skill set, project by project by project, until you've trained yourself in every colour and every technique and can then blend them together at will. Because as good as the Darren Lathams and Duncan Rhodes of this world are, and they're amazing, don't get me wrong, they weren't born with a paintbrush in their hand. Well, okay, maybe Duncan was. But they learned their craft, and they honed it probably not all in one go. They will have trained to do different things, practiced and practiced and practiced, project after project after project. Darren Latham is legendary for his non-metallic metal technique. He didn't just know how to paint non-metallics. Arguably, in terms of Games Workshop, the bloke pioneered it. So he had to learn, he had to train himself, and that took time, it took projects, and that tactical choice of doing it will have served him well. I'm not saying that he's using exactly this technique, but it's something to consider. So whatever you decide to do, because I've rambled on for only 20 minutes at this point, whatever you want to do when you're choosing a colour scheme, there are several things to consider. First, narrative. Is there a particular reason in the lore you want to make a certain army a certain way, and what colours do you need to do to make that happen? Second, techniques. Is there a style of painting you want to work on? non-metallic metals, object source lighting, whatever, and can that influence the colours you choose for the rest of the project? Third, techniques in terms of colours that you don't know. Are you still learning how to do purples like me? Are you wanting to learn flesh? Are you wanting to learn whatever? Picking your army and the models you paint can be a tactical choice in terms of what models you're going to work on, what techniques it will force you to learn, or which colours it's going to force you to pick in terms of practicing that skill and developing it. There are, of course, many other things that you might want to consider when it comes to building a project. You might want to think about speed. How quickly can you paint it? So you might want to pick a colour scheme you know so that you can knock it out very quickly because you've got to get to an event or to a tournament, or you've got to meet an army's on parade deadline, whatever the case may be. Or is it something where you might want to consider the tactical implications for gaming in terms of if this army is painted red, then I can use it as a Blood Angels army and therefore get the benefits therein, or whatever it so happens to be. So I thought I'd just give you a few things to think about, because choosing a colour scheme is not easy, and I've gone back and forth on this Slaanesh scheme so many times that I wanted to talk about it and sort of ramble about the ideas that I went through and hope that that might help you guys as well. If you have any advice or any thoughts, please do leave them in the comments down below. Not just for me, but for each other. Have a chat with each other, come up with ideas on why you pick a scheme, what it's allowed you to do, and sort of your rationale. Because the more ideas we have out there, the more use this video is to the maximum number of people. But either way, thank you very much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed the video. Make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed and subscribe if you're new. I believe we have now passed 35,000 subscribers, so we're on the way to that sacredest of sacred numbers in this hobby, that being the big 40k subs. I need to think about what I'm going to do for that. But we'll get there one day. But thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the video. This has been Tactica Imperialis, and this has been my thoughts on choosing a colour scheme for a Warhammer hobby project. I'll see you all again. Bye for now.